In the 90s, with high rates of unemployment and inflation, the IMF decided to impose a really violent form of austerity. And this really meant that Argentina lost its control over its money. It pegged the peso to the dollar, and it had to sell over 150 public utilities, assets, and businesses. In the process, many people became unemployed. And the private sector found it very hard to compete against an inundation of foreign capital into local markets. So many businesses went under. What also happened is some nefarious bosses and business owners started to practice nefarious practices like declaring bankruptcy and then stealing their own assets and selling them or moving somewhere else with cheaper labor. So workers caught on to this and started occupying their companies and then converting them to cooperatives. But this doesn't only just emerge out of nowhere. It emerges because the rates of exploitation on shop floors in Argentina at the time, so the mid-90s to the early 2000s, were so high that workers saw that their wage labor contracts were violated, right? The basic tenets of the wage labor contract were violated. And so they decided to take matters into their own hands. I borrow from British historian E.P. Thompson that what they did was they seized on a moral economy of work, where the basic agreement between capital and labor is ruptured. And so workers took over their workplaces and also seized on the social memory of a militant labor union activism in Argentina, occupying streets and plazas, which historically has a long tradition in Argentina, and in a convergence of a contagion of bottom-up social struggles, as Antonio Negri called Argentina at the turn of the millennium. You saw many social groups seizing plazas, seizing workplaces, and so the ERT movement emerges in this moment. And increasingly, more and more workers in small and medium-sized enterprises that had gone under, bankrupt, started taking over their workplaces, and they're still emerging and they still exist. So what I wanted to do was capture this through case studies, through what I call a political economy of the working class, because I think that, and I borrow that from Marx as well, because I think that this is a moment where it's not just about the political economy of capital, but what's interesting, the inversion of that is workers actually seizing their capacities from what they have sold off to the capitalist for themselves and running the shop and basically running a part of the economy. So that's what the book is about. It captures this moment and this working class experience.
So is it reasonable, for us to say that based on the Argentinian experience, and we must recall that Argentina was one of the most industrially developed countries and economies in all of Latin America, and therefore in many ways closer in its overall social organization to developed capitalist countries in North America, Western Europe, and so on. Is it then reasonable to infer that we have an actual historical test case in which workers were able to capture the workplaces that they depended on, to reorganize them, to run them, and to run them so effectively that even a government beholden to capitalist interests had to, in the end, recognize their popularity, their ability to provide gainful employment, etc., so that thousands and thousands of them have survived?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The workers in Argentina have shown time and time again, and through various macro and microeconomic crises, that they can run the shop. And let me also say what you said initially in your last comment, that Argentina, up until about 1975, between 45 and 75, had a 50-50 national income split between capital and labor. It had the strongest unions in Latin America. It had the largest working class in Latin America. And so in many ways, one can draw similarities between the US economy, the Canadian economy. To be part of the working class up until about 75 was to be part of the middle class in Argentina. That's my background. My father worked with cars, and my grandfather was a metal worker, and they very much could guarantee to get a house and all those trappings of middle class life. But with the imposition of neoliberalism and the way that it was imposed in Argentina, this impoverished this traditionally strong working class. And it was a way of breaking them up, actually. And it was a bloody way with the dictatorship. But what this shows is that workers can run their shops, they can run the economy, and they can run businesses in ways that are just as viable and competitive, if not more so, than, and in many ways they survive. What research shows, and my research included, is that workplaces run by workers actually survive difficulties much better, and they are in many ways much more productive.